Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. I'm so happy that you joined us to hear a little bit about art, industry, but especially on where the two meet, synergies between art and industry. And I will not very deliberately introduce myself. I think it will become clear during the talk who I am and what I do. So you see my name here, that's enough for now. Let's deep dive into the story. And to start off, I would like to share with you a movie. One of many movies I'm going to share in this next 30 minutes. What you see here is somebody, Theo Jansen, who in 1996 thought about the idea whether it would be possible to create a living creature, or maybe even a whole group of living creatures that live of nothing but the air, the wind, and something else, which is inevitably in our system, plastics. He created what he calls strand beasts. And every year he creates a new evolution of a strand beast, and he presents it, or he tests it, on the beach of Scheveningen, here in the Netherlands. He's been doing that for 25 years already. And what he didn't know was that his experiments actually led to a discovery, to a solution to a problem he was unaware of for all this time. Because 2 years ago, Theo Jansen got a call. He got a call from NASA. And NASA said, "Dear Theo, we are trying to build a rover to land on the planet Venus. There's only one problem. On planet Venus, nothing works. Our electronics do not work. And the only thing that is comparable to what we have on Earth is the wind. And you are the only person in the world who actually knows how to build moving things with just the wind." They started to collaborate, and what turned out is that Theo Jansen was actually the only one who was able to solve NASA's problem. Sometime before that, in 1969, artist Peter Struiken got his hands on a computer. And in those times, a computer was the size of a pretty big room. And he started to code. And while coding, he asked himself what the ultimate thing would be that a computer could be capable of doing. And he decided in 1969 that the ultimate capability of a software would be the ability to write itself. AI avant la lettre. So he wrote a code where all the pixels on a canvas could be either black or white. And the code itself decides what it would be. What he turned out to have invented was the QR code. At least that's what you see in here. And it is. It's exactly the same algorithm. 30 years before others saw its possibilities, and 50 years before post-corona mass adoption. What Theo Jansen and Peter Struiken did was experimenting. But why they managed to solve problems nobody saw when they did so was because their definition of what an experiment is and what it could be is different from what most of us consider an experiment. I guess most of you know about R&D experimentation, right? What happens in universities or in corporate R&D labs. It's about truth finding, knowledge creation, and it's about testing hypotheses, trying to filter out anything that is not relevant. And some of you, especially the TNW audience, probably knows about startup experimentation or new venture building experimentation, which is all about seeking value and validating assumptions, technical assumptions and commercial assumptions. But what very few people realize is that there's actually a third source of experimentation that leads to innovation. And I call it artistic experimentation. It's about finding possibilities. It's about creating experiences. And it's not about finding solutions to problems per se, although that happens along the way, but it's about continuously finding new choices for possible futures, which can be visualized. When it comes to defining choices about the future, artistic experimentation actually is the most suitable tool for analysis and guidance. That's my belief, but not just my belief, because actually it's not a new idea. 500 years ago, somebody called Leonardo da Vinci was already conducting artistic experimentation. But it took over 300 years for the rest of us to catch up and to reimagine what he had thought about and bring it into being. But in the second half of the 20th century, something interesting started to happen. The cycles between artists experimenting with technologies and possibilities and markets reinventing it and adopting it became shorter and shorter. And that led to all kinds of different programs where art and industry started to collaborate and started to merge. And let's look very briefly at this video from 1966. What you saw here was a unique moment in the history of technological development. This was 1966, and the collaboration was one between Bell Labs, you could say the Apple of the time, and a group of 10 artists led by Robert Rauschenberg. The artists were given access to the technologies newly invented by Bell Labs, but never been used in public. And they organized 9 evenings, theatrical evenings, where they tested, turned them inside out, and tried to find use cases for these technologies. And what you just witnessed was the first moment in history where wireless transmission and infrared camera technology were deployed, and it led to a gigantic host of interest. Based on the artists' experimental attitudes and their ability to deliver prototypes on a continuous basis, they are able to question technologies for its legitimacy and its responsibility. They're able to humanize them and add an ethical layer to it. They're able to explore new paths to progress. And, not the least, they're able to take science out of the lab, just like you see with this example of artist Ermi van Hoers and her company Nova Innova, who are pioneering the field of microbial fuel cell technology, or the ability to generate electricity from the plant's activities and the tree's activities itself. And it's a very beautiful sight. The plants light up with nothing more than a touch. Another example in this realm is that of Joseph Cohen, who collaborated with Sloan Kettering's Cancer Center in New York. The collaboration was actually based upon the scientists from Sloan Kettering asking Joseph to come up with a paint which includes nanocarbon tubes, which includes nanocarbon tubes. Their idea was the public does not understand what we are doing here and how we are developing biomarkers with nanocarbon tubes. So we asked an artist to put it into paint. They invited Joseph into their labs. Joseph started to experiment, but what he actually did was not some sort of scientific communication. No, he invented a whole new biomarker in the form of paint, which is able to detect early stage cancer much better than carbon nanotubes itself. The trick is that on the paint, through a chemical reaction, an early stage cancer can be detected through the urine somebody pees out, of course. And that is why we say, where artists experiment, futures are built. But where do they actually experiment, you might ask? Well, that's something we have been investigating for some time now. And we actually found 9 different domains, technological domains, or 8 technological domains and 1 social domain, where artists, research, and startups very strongly overlap. Within these domains, there are no less than 54 technological areas where this happens. And we have built a method, we call it the art-driven innovation method, to analyze them, to collect them, but also to develop innovations through artistic experimentation ourselves. At InfoArt, we run 2 program lines in which we produce art-driven innovations. And the first one is on closing material loops for sustainability and to contribute to the circular economy. These are two artworks that have been hanging above my couch for the last 2 years. And they both are starting questions which could become art-driven innovations in this field of closing material loops. The one on your left, by Christian Kragelund, is a set of used solar panels that have become waste. And although solar panels are part of our energy transition and part of our green future, there's very, very little known and very, very little activity around actually recycling and reusing them. The one on the right, you might wonder what it is. These are plant roots. Plant roots that have grown underground and have formed patterns, thanks to the artist Diana Scherer. She thinks that what happens underground with plants is just as valuable as what happens above ground. And she creates beautiful artwork out of it. But they have some very interesting competences as well, like being able to capture heat or to keep out noise. Well, these are two of the questions that we are still struggling with how to create art-driven innovations out of them. So if any of you have a good idea, you must let us know. But one that did make it is called Reboot and Reuse. And 2 years ago, artist Bastiaan de Nenny and InfoArt, we started to venture and to experiment based on the idea if it would be possible to change the form and function of a material time and time again without stopping, without losing any of its material qualities. It became a venture of experimentation with different types of materials, a lot of design into how to design for circularity and for monostreaming, and it led to a lot of crazy ideas on what it could be. What you're actually looking at now is what seems to be some sort of interior, but based on a tooth, or a motorcycle. Artistic prototypes, which became actual prototypes over time, after we started to get further and further and further. And this month, the company Arkilo was launched as a result of this and got its first startup investment entered. The second program line that we're running is around data interfaces and questions how data interfaces can actually change relations between humans or between humans and nature. And what you see in the back here is what was for us the inspiration to work on this topic. Here you see flexible LED screens from Spanish artist Daniel Canogar. And Daniel Canogar, back in the early 1990s, the time when internet was not really known yet, cell phones were not there, and TV stations were big and heavy, he questioned why the screen that we project our images on could not be as fluid, as flexible as the data that we project on them. He found out that something like that was not available, and so he actually invented bendable, foldable, flexible LED screens. He was so enthusiastic with his invention, not just as an artwork, but also as a possibility, that he approached different companies with his invention, and he said to them, this is the future. This is the future of screening. And none of them believed him. They were too busy trying to create these big things, and they said to him, no, this is never going to happen. People will never want this. Well, fast forward to 2020, 21, all of the companies who rejected this idea 25 years ago are actually saying it's the future now. Within this line of inquiry, within this line of data interfaces, we are conducting several projects and several ideas around human-machine interaction, screenless interfacing, touch transmissions, and the one in the middle on the top, sensory data feedback systems. I want to highlight one of them, which is called Prosthetic X. And within Prosthetic X, we have started to experiment around the idea how we can enhance beauty and health through technology on the outsides of our body. Taking inspiration from the organs of animals and people, we created a series of body prosthetics that give us feedback on our internal and external functioning without the need for screens or apps. That's not so easy. And for the last 2 years, we've been trying out all kinds of different materials and prototyping all kinds of different intuitive feedback solution possibilities. And very briefly, I want to show 2 of these outcomes, there are 10 in total, how they function. This is a robotic installation, actually, that is inspired by butterfly wings. It goes on the nose, and once the air that you breathe in is healthy, it opens up like the wings of a butterfly, and the more dirty the air becomes, the more closed it gets, and it protects your nose from dangerous or from polluted air. Or another one, which is basically an activity tracker, but then completely reimagined. Inspired by anemones, sea anemones, this is a set of 5 different points that you can place on your body, on the eyebrow, that light up depending on how much you have walked in a day or in a week. And the idea is that you fill up all 5 lights, you open up all 5 anemones to get your daily minimum amount of movement. This is how artistically we envision them and they look like. But also this project does not remain artistic. This goes into museums and into exhibitions. But it led to a couple of interesting outcomes that are now on the verge of becoming their own companies. One of them is around data. Because if you create organs for yourself to monitor your internal and external health data, it would not be other than logical that you also control completely what happens with that data. We found out that no such system exists. Most data systems are based on, of course, data sharing and data usage for profit, less or more encrypted, but still, the whole idea that you as an individual decide 100% what happens with your data and all the options are yours doesn't exist. So we started to create one, and it's called a Data Donor Register, or DADR. It's currently being experimented or prototyped. Of course, another follow-up development is to bring all these artistic experiments and prototypes back to the human scale and actually create something out of it which you can wear, for which you see one of the prototypes here. It goes on the ear, and it's an ear slope, and it's basically an inflatable membrane which blows up and decreases based on whatever you have it monitor. In this case, it's monitoring the amount of transmission signals in your direct environment, but it could also be connected to your heartbeat or something else. And based on a couple of the most interesting ideas in the experiment, we are creating a wearable device, which has the name VIX and is currently in prototyping stage. So to go back to these 54 fields of where artists are experimenting beyond the state of the art in a way that is interesting for science, but mainly for industry to look into, we can recap on the different examples that I tried to show you. And we started with Theo Jensen, the movable beast on the beach, which fits perfectly into energy harvesting, but then without the use of electronics. Peter Struiken, the inventor of the QR code, computer creativity, but then before we knew the word existed. The living light, microbial fuel cell technology. Joseph Cohen, carbon nano painting, carbon nanotubes. Daniel Canogar, flexible electronics. And our own projects, Arkilo on bioplastics and Prosthetic X on topics like bionics and health data ownership. But that's not all. We are not the only ones experimenting in this. More and more attention is being generated for the possibility of using artistic experimentation for industrial innovation in collaboration. And from a European perspective and national perspective, different projects and programs have been set up the last couple of years, which are active now. One that I guess you saw on the program today, which also led to me being able to present here, for which thanks to Betafactory, is a program that brings together European manufacturing companies, artists, and technology suppliers in a year-long experiments around improving the factories both digitally and in terms of their product innovation. We just closed our first round of experiment selection, and the first 7 experiments will be running as of tomorrow, but next year another open call will come and there will be space for another 8 collaborative projects between these 3 fields. And they correspond then mainly to three of the domains that I showed you earlier. AI and robotics, a very heavy part of it, human-machine interaction, maybe some of biomimetics, and printing and materials. But there's another organization or group that is setting up these kinds of experimentation spaces, and it's called STARTS, Science, Technology, and the Arts. We are currently a network of 12 regional centers, of which my company is one, but there are many others, and you see them here. And also there, as of mid of next month, mid of October, 21 different calls, challenges will be opened up in 11 different locations, all with the possibility to get funded for 6-month artistic prototyping experiments, artistic prototyping projects. And there's more to come, I can assure you, in the coming years. So to round up this brief introduction to where art and industry meet and how art can be a stimulator, but even an inventor of what later becomes known in commerce, I think it's fair to say that where art goes, commerce soon follows. And the picture in the back of this slide is not chosen for no reason. You think you see the world, you're actually looking at a picture of Google Earth, but the title underneath gives a hint away that also Google Earth was originally conceived by artists. Thank you very much for your attention.